Hello and welcome to the Lowdown, our brand new show on Sky Sports Premier League, which will be dropping every single Friday, where we're going to be offering you deeper analysis than anywhere else on Sky Sports. Think progressive passes, expected goals, and a lot of fun and fierce debate. It's going to be epic. Coming up on today's show, we profile the attacker that Arsenal need to sign.
Bukayo Saka needs support. He's put up 18,000 career minutes at the age of 22.
We debate the striker that Chelsea could bring in if they can't get Victor Osimhen.
£20 million, which is what he could be available for this summer. His contract's up next year. 19 goals in the league last year, 24 the year before that.
And the ideal Man United midfielder. I think he could play alongside Casemiro and Mainu. I think he could play in that Casemiro role. Welcome to the show, everybody. Look who I've got for you. It's Joe Thomlinson of Saturday Social and Sky Sports fame. Joe, how are you?
I'm excited for this, mate.
Should be massive. Mikey McCubbin of Football Daily. How are you, mate?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Dukes. Very, very well. Also very excited. New show, it's going to be fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. Today, guys, we are looking at budget alternatives for overpriced stars. That is crucial. Myself and Mikey are playing the role of scouts. But Joe, do you want to quickly explain what is your role today?
Yeah, I'm going to be the sporting director in this sandwich. For instance, the first team we're looking at is Arsenal. A rumour that has been circulating over the last 7 days is Leroy Sané potentially joining on the wing. I'm looking for cheaper alternatives for Leroy Sané's transfer to Arsenal. You're both going to pitch me a name. I'm going to decide who I think has made the better pitch and select that player. Whoever's got the most points at the end will come out victorious.
Love it. Clear. Right, Arsenal have had a magnificent start to the window. Calafiori, it looks like Mikel Merino might be confirmed by the time this video goes out as well. But Mikey, let's talk about Leroy Sané. And would he be a good fit at Arsenal? And if not, who would be your option?
It's fair to say that Leroy Sané is if you're not looking at transfer fees, etc., would be a great fit at many top clubs. I think last season was a difficult one for him at Bayern, especially in the second half of the campaign. But you'd struggle to find many players aside from Harry Kane who could have said that they were playing at their best in the second half of last season. The first half of last season, Leroy Sané looked like he was up there with Saka in terms of output from the right wing. Absolutely brilliant, in terms of both goals and his creativity. He was putting up world-class numbers. But from an Arsenal perspective, Leroy Sané would cost quite a lot, especially given that it looks like he wants to stay at Bayern Munich anyway.
Even with 1 year left on his contract?
Well, if they could tempt him away, yes. But I just my gut feeling is that he may well sign a new contract. To be honest,
so do you think this was a contract play from his agent?
Potentially, it just all the noises coming from Leroy Sané is that he wants to stay at Bayern. And you're right, 1 year left on his deal does mean that finding a budget alternative was always going to be quite difficult. But I think either way, Bayern are just very good at digging their heels in with players, right? Like, look at what's happened with Alphonso Davies. Still not signed a new deal with them, and yet the talk of him going to Real Madrid has gone quiet for now. So it just getting players out of Bayern, especially ones that they want to keep, is difficult, I think. And so I've actually looked elsewhere in Germany. Now, there are a few alternatives who would be great. Say Pedro Neto, I think, has always looked like a player who'd be a great fit.
He's not budget, though, is he?
He's not budget. He's not budget. He would be my ideal. Yeah, 60 million is what Wolves at least are going to charge for Pedro Neto. I also thought about Johan Bakayoko at PSV, who would be a bit more budget, but I don't know whether when you're signing a 21-year-old. From another club, a promising one at that, whether you want someone who so far in their career has only played on the right-hand side. I just think that's a really, really tough sell.
That's the place for Arsenal. But I look at that Arsenal squad, man.
So
Bukayo Saka needs support. He's got 18,000 career minutes at the age of 22.
He does need support. He does need support. But the problem is that Saka just will always be first choice there. And if you're saying to Bakayoko, come to Arsenal, that's basically going to be his role. He's just going to be on the bench for Saka. I just don't think if you buy a backup for Saka that Arteta's actually going to use them all that much, and so I think you need someone who's going to be able to provide cover in other areas of the field as well, actually. And I think we don't speak enough about how over-reliant Arsenal are on Martin Ødegaard. You know, he played more minutes than Gabriel did last year. You know, he hasn't really had a prolonged amount of time out with injury since coming to Arsenal. Yeah, touch wood for Arsenal fans, but I feel like that's also an area where the drop-off will be massive if they can't rely on him.
So you're looking at a winger that can play both sides and potentially contribute as a number 10 as well.
I'm looking at
someone. Sounds like a Swiss Army knife.
I'm actually not. Well, I mean, Leroy Sané has been that for Bayern at points as well, hasn't he? So, and I'm also looking at budget. Someone with 2 years left on their current contract. Someone who I think is, last season was hitting some of the best form of their career as well. Similar age profile, someone who can come in and produce straight away. Julian Brandt at Borussia Dortmund. He only got one fewer goal involvement than Sane did last year. Like I said, contract up in 2 years. So if Dortmund are going to sell, then this summer would be a good time to do so. I feel like he's the sort of player who you could get in around 35 million euros, given he only cost them 25 million back in 2019 when he moved from Bayer Leverkusen. Amazing finisher. Like, he continuously overproduces in terms of expected goals. I think last year he scored 7 goals. His XG was only at 4.4, so he was putting away quite tough chances. The season before that, I think he scored 9 from 5.2 XG. So, he's able to score from outside the box. He's able to produce, from half chances, which, in a title race, I think is, really important to have a player like that. He also was creating more chances per game than anyone in the Arsenal squad last season. He was right up there with someone like Bruno Fernandes in a Borussia Dortmund side, which were dysfunctional at many points last season. So it's not the most orthodox signing here, but he is someone who can cover in a number of areas. And I know Arsenal have a lot of those. I was about to say, I know you've got Trossard, I know you've got Havertz, but Trossard was barely used in the centre last year. Brandt can do a job on the right-hand side as well. I know it's not been where he's played the most in the last couple of years. But I just think someone like that, I think Arsenal have to go for the title this season. And I think Brandt is someone who can immediately come in and, if not raise the level of the entire team, can raise the level of Arsenal at important points this season.
I think as the sporting director here, I think it's a very good pitch. I really like the fact that he's overperforming his XG. You look at some of the Arsenal squad, Gabriel Jesus, Kai Havertz at times, not so much in the second half of the season, underperforming in front of goal. But I tend to disagree a little bit with the squad layout of Arsenal. Kai Havertz can operate in that sort of advanced area as well. On the left, I like Trossard out there. I think Gabriel Jesus can offer options out there. Obviously, Martinelli, if he can refine some form after a bit of a struggle last season, has hit the ground quite well in pre-season this time around. I think they're kind of stocked on the left. I actually think Rice can kind of play a little bit more advanced as a box crusher at times too.
But surely if they don't sign a centre-forward this summer, and there's no guarantee that they will, then Havertz surely is going to be playing all of his minutes up front, right?
I think he will.
I still feel like there's minutes to be had in the centre and on the right.
I think on that sort of replacement for Ødegaard, if he was to get injured, then Havertz could drop in and Gabriel Jesus
But even just someone who could come on for Ødegaard on 60 minutes and maintain that level.
Is that not what you could also say? I could make the exact same argument of Bukayo Saka, who has put up the same amount of career minutes as Vinicius Jr., who's 2 years older than him. It's getting to the point where he's playing an unhealthy amount of football almost at 22 years old. He's one of the most supremely talented right wingers in world football. His numbers hold up and stack up amongst anybody, to be honest with you, in Europe. You look at his contributions comparatively to the left wing slot last year, I would argue that he's the player that potentially at times needs taking off at 60 minutes.
Well,
needs some support.
That's why Brandt can do that, and Jesus can do that
Brandt,
as well.
I feel a bit harsh taking apart another. I thought it was a very good suggestion as well, but the fact that Dortmund, it feels like Adeyemi's future's not quite certain. It looks like Nicholas Fulcro's interest in West Ham. Do they want to lose another key player from their last couple of years? He's probably been one of, if not their outstanding outfield player in the last 2-3 years in terms of consistency. I think it's a hard job. Joe, I think you'll like what I've gone, because I've gone pure right winger. I've gone a guy that can take some minutes off Saka. And I do think this is a really high potential player. Look, he's not quite there just yet, but he is. I remember throughout last summer I was suggesting Nico Williams for Arsenal. Nico Williams. They didn't go for him then. They regret not going for him, given the fact he's had that breakout at Euro 2024, that amazing season at Athletic Club. This guy could be in a Nico Williams-esque position in a year, and it's Francisco Conceição of FC Porto. He's had a really interesting career so far. Obviously, his dad, Sergio Conceição, is the FC Porto manager. He came through the FC Porto Academy, didn't really get regular minutes, then went to Ajax the season that Anthony had just left the club. I don't think that was the plan, so he was suddenly thrust into a bit of a role that he wasn't quite ready for. It didn't work at Ajax at all. Mohamed Kudus played all the minutes. He didn't speak Dutch. He didn't speak English. It was a really bad spell at Ajax. They then sold him to FC Porto, loaned him with an obligation to buy if he played over 45 minutes in 25 games, which he did easily last season. He had an amazing year, and factor in that when he rejoined FC Porto, the mayor of Porto came out and complained about the transfer. So that was what he was dealing with on a personal front as well. Lots of speculation that, he's, it's just because your dad's the manager, etc. And he still managed to have an amazing year. 8 goals and 8 assists in all competitions. By the end of it, by about March time, he was being called up by Roberto Martinez for Portugal, scored off the bench against the Czech Republic in their first game in Euro 2024. And you look at his strengths, and they are very comparable to Bukayo Saka. It's about finding good areas in the box to pick up progressive passes, so passes that go 10 yards towards the opposition goal. Bukayo Saka is freakishly good at that. Top in Europe's top 5 leagues, but second was Kulusevski at around 12. Conceição in Portugal last year, which you do have to take into account, it's a lesser standard, was putting up similar numbers there as well. He's a really excellent dribbler, and I think he won't mind playing a bit of a bench role for a season or two. He's just 21, but I think, with Fabio Vieira not having worked out as a Saka sort of alternative, right wing is the place that I would go. And he could pick up minutes in easier Champions League games or league games. And I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I have to say I'm leaning slightly more towards that right wing slot, having looked at how they're working in pre-season as well, Arsenal, and last season's numbers. You think Reece Nelson only put up 400 minutes last season, Fabio Vieira only 400 minutes last season. I think both of those were options in Arteta's head for that right wing cover position behind Bukayo Saka. I'm not sure they've quite pushed Saka in the way he was expecting. I'm going to give a point to Dougie here. Just about Dougie. I think you were saved a little bit by the right wing suggestion.
You did set me up.
I went in with that in my mind. One of the suggestions I was going to make was potentially Rafinha. I think Barcelona might be open to doing a deal at a little bit more of a cut price there. I think he's got a proven track record in the Premier League. His underlying numbers in Spain still
solid,
really, really strong, despite the fact he's not particularly loved by the Spanish audience. So I think there could be something to be said for bringing Rafinha back on a cut price deal.
I like it.
This sort of loan with an obligation to buy, that sort of dirt that sometimes gets thrown around.
Where should we go to next, El Sporting Director?
Let's go to Chelsea. I'm going to put my Chelsea cap on. And again this week we see big news coming from David Ornstein, from Fabrizio Romano, of Victor Osimhen's name being touted potentially as part of a deal for Romelu Lukaku. Now, Osimhen's agent has kind of come out and to a level poo-pooed it, saying this sort of chat about a loan is just not going to happen, but there are still rumblings. Could it be a €70 million deal plus Romelu Lukaku? But if Chelsea can't afford Victor Osimhen, who should they go for? Who is a budget alternative to Victor Osimhen?
Why don't you go first this time, Diggs?
I'll do the honours. Firstly, I'm going to say that as long as the price is right, I think it's one of the deals of the summer getting Osimhen in for Lukaku. People talk about his injury issues, and yes, he has had a few injury issues over the years. Lots of them have been quite niche. That eye socket injury, which he broke on Milan Skriniar's shoulder, nearly lost an eye. He's had malaria. He's had, I think, a broken shoulder as well. But even last year in a down year for Napoli, 3 managers finishing 10th, still got 15 goals in the league. I think that was really impressive. And you look at actually his minutes per goal over the last 3 seasons. It's only, I think he's had 119 minutes per goal. Harry Kane's at 114. And Harry Kane scored 36 last year for Bayern Munich. So this is a pure goal scorer that I think Chelsea would be very lucky to get their hands on, given the situation they've been on.
What does it mean for Nicholas Jackson? Because I know that people kind of hammer Nicholas Jackson. I personally think it's quite unfair. I think he had a really underrated season last year, 14 Premier League goals. He was creating 3 chances a game. He's in the top 10% of European forwards for progressive carries. He actually links play a little bit better than people give him credit for, I think, particularly on the turn when he's able to spin a defender. He's only 23. He would have been in this list of our bargain strikers available. If they go and splash 70 million on Osimhen, what does Nicholas Jackson have?
Yeah, as you say, I think it's all about the terms of the deal. If it's a loan with an obligation to buy, if it's a fee of 60, 70 million euros, I still think it's a unique opportunity for Chelsea, having finished outside the Champions League and having been embarrassed really in the last 2 seasons prior to a little pickup under Pochettino late last year. I do get where you're coming from. I think a lot of Chelsea fans were really buoyed by what they saw by Nicholas Jackson. Thought 14 league goals was a really good return, given the fact I think he'd only started 16 league games in a top 5 league prior to last year. So he was raw, but those were excellent numbers in the end. And that's why I thought maybe John Duran, who they're linked with early in the window, made a little bit of sense. But I also think that's why you'll probably like my suggestion. Again, you're kind of setting me up here. I'm suggesting Santiago Jimenez of Feyenoord. Spent the last 2 seasons there, having joined from Cruz Azul in Mexico. He's Mexican. He scored 23 goals in his first year as they won the league under Arne Slot. 26 goals last year in 41 games as they won the DKNVB Cup under Arne Slot again. Of course, he's now Liverpool manager. Feyenoord's an interesting place to shop this summer because they've already lost Mats Wiefer to Brighton. Would they want to lose another key player? I'm not quite sure. But this is a really, really high potential player. Like in terms of his non-penalty XG and expected assists per 90, top 1% of forwards in Europe. Really strong shots per 90 as well, over 4. Is pretty solid in the air, can dribble effectively as well, runs the channels. I'm surprised there hasn't been more interest this summer. I thought he'd be perfect for a club like Spurs, who I feel like are crying out for, another striker on their books. You look at that Richarlison move, he's had some mental health struggles, he's had some difficulties, but it felt like striker would be a priority for them. And I really like what Santiago Jimenez has managed to do. There is an element of, it's the Eredivisie. Is he guaranteed to be a success in the Premier League? Potentially not, but I don't think the fee would be that significant either. I think it'd be around 45 million euros, so around 40 million pounds. And yeah, he looks like a really high quality player. Is he a guaranteed upgrade on Nicholas Jackson right now?
This was a problem for me, Dougie.
I think maybe. I'm not
sure about this one, especially given that Guiu has come in, performed really well in pre-season. Looks like he's actually going to be included as part of this Chelsea first team moving forward. And when I think of it, it's almost like how do we get the best out of Christopher Nkunku to a level as well. Christopher Nkunku with such bad injury problems in that first season, but 33 goal involvements and 20 goal involvements in his final 2 Leipzig seasons. His numbers off the charts. I think Jackson would definitely get the best out of Nkunku. Do I see this as a massive upgrade on Nicholas Jackson? No. And I would probably just double down on Jackson and use Guiu.
It's difficult, but then we are looking for budget alternatives in those positions. And also, I do get your point though. Sorry, Michael, before we go on to yours. It does feel like Chelsea need to strengthen a few other positions as well. They've signed quite a few goalkeepers this summer. I don't think any of them are probably Champions League quality at the moment. I think that's probably fair to say. I still think they look a little short of high quality centre-backs. We'll see what sort of shape Wesley Fofana comes back in, but I think Thiago Silva could be a big absentee. So it feels like Santiago Jimenez is a player that they could sign along with strengthening other positions.
Yeah, I think as well, you did touch on it there, but losing Wiefer to Brighton, that's a big loss. Minter contributed so much, of course, being recalled by Newcastle and then sold on to Brighton. He's hit the ground running in pre-season as well. So 2 pretty vital players being lost there. If they were to lose Santiago Jimenez as well, 3 massive losses. I feel like the fee could be a little bit more sizable than the budget is currently being talked about here.
Feels like I left the door ajar.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a jar.
I've stepped through it. It is a jar. And again, fell into this trap of who is a clear upgrade on Jackson? Do Chelsea actually need a centre forward if it's not Osimhen? It's a very pertinent question. I have gone for pure budget here. I've gone pure budget, and I think in terms of a striker available this summer, in terms of money to how much of a proven goal scorer they are, I don't think anyone beats Jonathan David at Lille. 51 goals and assists in the league across the last 2 seasons. He's Lille's top scorer this century. I know, clubs have continued to be linked with him and not signed him over the years, and that always makes fans a little bit scared because it's like, what are the scouts seeing that potentially we're not? Is there a reason why he's not being considered to make that step up, say, to a top 4 Premier League club? But I think for £20 million, which is what he could be available for this summer, his contract's up next year. I just think he's worth a punt. He's not going to demand huge wages. The other thought that I had was someone like Gonzalo Ramos at PSG. If Osimhen was to fall through and Osimhen was to go to PSG, but I just still think you'd have to spend quite a lot of money on someone like Ramos, even if his potential is higher. But I just think, I don't really know what more Jonathan David has to do. Double figures in his last 6 straight seasons, pretty much all his seasons as as a top level professional. 19 goals in the league last year, 24 the year before that.
Written in front of me right here, I've got alternatives. My own suggestion, Jonathan David.
Oh, there you go.
I really like this suggestion. Yeah, since turning
Love it.
20, he scored 101 league goals. He's averaging 25 goals a season, just over 25 goals a season across the last 4 seasons. I really agree. I don't know what more Jonathan David has to do. There must be something that top level elite scouts are seeing that potentially the numbers and us watching Lille we aren't seeing. But I was also going to suggest this for Tottenham as well, but we're not doing striker, I don't think, are we, in there? So for me, I'm going to have to land on Mikey's point here. 1-1. Next up, we're moving to Manchester United. Lots of rumours circulating around Manchester United. Principally, though, at the moment, we're going to ignore the centre-back options because Leroy has come in despite the long-term injury. The Ligue feels like an option there, doesn't he? Mazraoui in the right-back slot. We're going to focus on the midfield because
this is interesting.
The sort of chase of Ugarte has continued, hasn't it? Now, this might well change over the next week or so, and there are already rumblings that the João Neves deal to PSG means that PSG will allow Ugarte to leave on loan, potentially, to Manchester United. But as we stand today, the fee reported they want for Ugarte is upwards to 50 million euros, 50-60 million euros if they were to buy him right now. So I want a budget alternative for Manuel Ugarte at Manchester United. We're really looking for a midfielder here.
Okay.
Mikey, do you want to
Shall I kick off this
Yeah,
time?
you go for it.
This was, again, like a bit of a difficult one because really good number 6s are
Rare.
at a real
So
premium
hard,
right now. I think it's the most rare position in world football, aside from maybe like a really, really good left back, of which there are like maybe none. Sorry, all the left backs out there. But the world class left backs at least. Maybe not really good. There's lots of really good left backs out there, but world class left backs there is a bit of a dearth. And obviously Manuel Ugarte. Right, but I was speaking. I met a Sporting fan last weekend, and he was calling him Ugarte, so I'm going to call him Ugarte now.
Okay.
So
I'll adjust
I don't know.
We've dropped the E.
Yeah, I thought it was Ugarte. I said it to him. He didn't call me out on it. He was very polite, but then he just started calling me Ugarte. So I don't know. Blame him if that's if Ugarte's wrong. But obviously, his tackle inception numbers are huge. At Sporting, he was quite a big kind of dribbler. He was really good at beating the press as well. We've seen less of that from him at PSG. But I'm actually going to Portugal, to an old favourite of mine, as the replacement or the alternative to Ugarte here. Florentino Luis at Benfica. He's been at Benfica for a number of years now. He's turning 25 this month. He's not young anymore, but back in kind of 2018, 2019, he was really being bigged up as one of Europe's next real mammoth midfielders, and it's just not quite happened for him on a consistent basis. And he, a couple of years ago, Liverpool were looking at him. This summer, it's Everton and Leicester who have been supposedly looking at him. So the kind of level of suitor who seems to be coming in for him has really lowered. And that may be a bit of a concern, but his numbers haven't dropped off at all. He was putting up more tackles and interceptions every game than Ugarte was for Benfica last year. And granted, PSG keep more possession, so Ugarte probably had less, did have less opportunities to make those tackles, and so his numbers look maybe a little bit more impressive. But Benfica was still averaging around 60% possession last year. That's a full 10% more than Man United were. We expect United to play a bit more of a possession style this season. They kind of have to avoid the chaos that we saw at Old Trafford last year. But Florentino Luis, the edge that he does have on a player like Ugarte is that his progressive passing numbers are really, really good as well. I think he's on around, let me get it down here, 7.6 progressive passes per 90, which is very, very solid. Anything above 5-6 is really, really solid. And especially from a defensive midfielder, that's really where you want to be at the top level. A lot better than Casemiro, a lot better than Mainu. I think that's a key that United need, actually.
Progressive passes.
Yeah, and Ugarte hasn't been doing that at PSG. And so, if Mainu's not offering that, if Casemiro's not offering that, Scott McTominay certainly you wouldn't be offering that if you're playing him deeper in midfield. That's part of the problem at United is that Bruno has to drop so deep so much of the time just in order to have that kind of creative presence further back. Florentino Luis does offer that. Will he be able to offer that as much in the Premier League. I think it would take some adaptation, but he certainly has the physical capabilities to make it in the Premier League. I've always really, really liked this guy. I was recommending him for Liverpool last summer. Liverpool still need a number 6, let's not forget. That seems to have got a bit quiet, but I do think on a budget, I think United would be able to secure a signing like this for around 30 million euros, which I think would be really good business.
I think this is really interesting, isn't it? Because this sort of idea of an alternate to Manuel Ugarte really depends on how United are going to play next season, doesn't it? If they're going to play in wide open spaces and leave the defensive midfielder isolated to cover huge, vast swathes of ground, it's going to have to be a real defensive monster that can cover that ground in there, isn't it? But if United are going to adapt and get on the ball more and play a slightly more structured style of play, maybe you need somebody who's going to be able to pick the ball up in the first phase and have those progressive pass numbers that you haven't really seen from a Manchester United defensive midfielder in some time. I think there is going to be some reliance on Collier this season. Of course, he's broken through in pre-season, still only 20 years old. Man United signed him from Brighton, or picked him up out of Brighton's academy when he couldn't agree a contract, and there are very, very high hopes for Collier being that sort of defensive midfielder who can pick the ball up and shift it in the first phase. He's been excellent in pre-season, and I have very little doubt he's going to make his debut for the senior team early in the season. But with losing Amrabat, can you just rely on Collier? Casemiro doesn't look like he's going to go, and Kobbie Mainoo in there because Scott McTominay might leave. So what kind of defensive midfielder are you going to pitch, Dukes?
I've got someone who can do a bit of everything. Probably not the defensive monster as you talk about as Ugarte, but can play as an 8, can play as a 6, and unlike Florentino Luis, has been consistently playing for the last few years. You talk about the injury issues that United already have this summer. Yoro, Højlund picking up injuries, Casemiro's fitness can't be relied upon. This guy's missed 3 games in the last 4 seasons. Youssouf Fofana of Monaco. Absolute legend of the game, really, in Monaco. I think he's an absolute hero. When he got brought in, he joined at the same time as Tchouameni. He really helped his adaptation to the French league. And you mentioned Florentino Luis's progressive passes. How many was it again, Mikey?
7.6.
Yeah, I'm topping that with 8.3. That's in the top 5% of midfielders. And last year, Denis Zakaria was performing more of that defensive midfield role, so he did play a little bit more box-to-box, 4 goals and 4 assists in the league. He's been regularly used by the French setup, by Didier Deschamps in the last few years. He's now been capped 21 times. He played in 6 of their 7 matches at the 2022 World Cup. Didn't actually play as much in the most recent Euros, as Rabiot sort of took his place a little bit, something that Deschamps probably ended up regretting. But this is a guy that can chip in defensively, 3.2 defensive actions. He's a really solid dribbler through tight spaces. That progressive passing is there as well. Maybe he's a little bit too similar with Kobbie Mainoo, which you might want to consider. But actually, for where United are right now, I think he could play alongside Casemiro and Mainoo. I think he could play in that Casemiro role. He's probably a little bit further along than Mainoo in his development right now. And he's got that experience of playing for a top club like Monaco for the last 4 seasons. And, has international experience as well. And the price. He's been linked with a move to Milan this summer for 25 to 30 million euros. West Ham, Arsenal and United were supposedly sniffing around. And Monaco are generally a selling club. They don't, take you over the coals for prices. So I think Youssouf Fofana would be a good option.
I think that 1 year left on his contract as well. And I do think there's something to be said where we've seen him in those highly pressurised situations, like you said, at World Cups, in major moments, being trusted, can play a multitude of different positions. I think I'm going to side with Fofana on this one, Duke. So it goes 2-1 to Dougie.
That's fair.
Let's go to Liverpool, shall we?
Yeah.
And this was a very interesting transfer that was rumbling earlier in the window. It doesn't feel like it's going to happen now. Very much felt like a PSR issue at the time. It's Anthony Gordon to Liverpool. Of course, he was kind of suggested as part of a swap deal with Liverpool when the PSR issues were starting to bite. That's not going to happen anymore. But do Liverpool still want a winger? And if so, who is a cheap alternative to Anthony Gordon?
First of all, I'm not looking on the left-hand side. I don't really understand it, to be honest.
No, neither do I.
With Luis Diaz, with Diogo Jota, with Darwin Nunez that can play on the left, with Cody Gakpo that can play on the left as well.
Do you think he will play Cody Gakpo out there at times?
I don't think so. I think he'll probably play more centrally, if I'm totally honest. But he can play out there. So I just don't see the priority.
He's a lot better out there. Honestly, I think at the Euros it really showed it. I was listening to Ruud van Nistelrooy talk about his usage of Cody Gakpo at PSV, and he said he's a left winger. He is a left winger. And that is where I personally think you get the best out of Cody Gakpo. Like, I love Luis Diaz. such a ferocious player. Underperformed his XG a little bit last season and missed some big opportunities despite his output still being very strong. I think Darwin Núñez is probably going to play as a 9. So although left wing we're not going to talk about today, I just think I wanted to get the point out there that Gakpo could offer a very solid option to Arne Slot on that left wing.
Do you not think that there's a reason why Klopp never really trusted him out there? It feels like, he had 18 months with him. Is it that Cody Gakpo doesn't necessarily have everything that's needed to be a left winger in the Premier League? Like we've even seen, like someone like Luis Diaz when he first came in was so good, but just all it took was one injury, and Luis Diaz suddenly looked very, very normal as a left winger. Like it feels like whenever I've seen Cody Gakpo play out there for Liverpool, at least in the Klopp system, maybe it'll be different under Slot, but it always looked like he was way too easy to take out of the game.
Yeah, potentially, but I don't think he's necessarily had loads of opportunity to start on that left wing slot. Let's not forget Luis Diaz started 32 of the 38 Liverpool games in that left wing role last season, so there's not a bunch of opportunities. And I do think it's harder when you're trying to come on off the bench, make impacts in cup games when the system isn't quite powering the way it should be. And let's face it, towards the back end of the season, that Liverpool system really wasn't working the way Jurgen Klopp wanted it to work. I don't know, man. I personally think that he should be given an opportunity on the left wing. So despite the fact Anthony Gordon was the name raised here, I agree, Dukes. I think Mo Salah backups is potentially where we should be looking here.
We're on the same page again. Mo Salah, 32 now. It feels like Harvey Elliott might be used in that number 10 slot. He's had a really good pre-season. It feels like Harvey Elliott is set for a massive year. I really want to see more out of Dominic Szoboszlai centrally as well. I don't think they're going to be playing too much from the right-hand side. Mo Salah, of course, 32 now. Feels like he's almost definitely going to stay at Liverpool. There doesn't feel like there's any murmurs coming from Saudi Arabia.
He's out of contract in the summer.
And he's out of contract soon, so they do need to start looking ahead. There has been sort of murmurs about Takefusa Kubo, but of Real Sociedad, who I do really like as a player, but I think the player I'm going to suggest is a little bit further ahead at the moment, at least in that
Kubo
right wing
also
slot.
Really expensive to get out.
Yeah.
Big,
and they've
big
just
price.
sold Marino, or potentially about to sell Marino to Arsenal. So I'm going to suggest a player that you actually briefly mentioned for Arsenal in Johan Bakayoko. Pure right winger. His numbers exploded last year at PSV, but they were very good the year before as well. 10 league goal contributions in 23 games the season before last. Last year that rose to 21 in 33. And you look at his dribble numbers in particular, he is left-footed, but he can go on the outside as well. There is a sort of Jeremy Doku-like energy to him, and I really wanted to see more of him at the Euros. I think he was really underused by Domenico Tedesco because, top dribbler in Europe last year, in Europe's top 5 leagues, I think was Mohamed Kudus in about 130. If Bakayoko had been playing in Europe's top 5 leagues, he completed 92, which I think was 5th most. So huge dribble numbers. And also of that top 5, which I think he'd have been just outside, his dribble success rate was really high as well. So he's making the right decisions at the right time, which for a 21-year-old is really pretty rare. So I'm excited to see where he could go. I don't think he'd cost a bomb out of PSV, and I think he could be gettable.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is definitely value to be had there, Bakayoko. I've previously suggested in one of the videos with the Bukayo Saka suggestion. I don't think it's the worst call. I think he is probably ready for a big step. But is he your suggestion, or have you gone for someone else?
He's not my suggestion, but you'll be glad to know I've also not gone for a pure left winger. Not a pure left winger.
Love it, mate.
But I have gone for someone who can play on both wings.
Right.
Okay.
It's Brighton's Simon Adingra, who I think is being slept on a bit. I'm really surprised that his name hasn't come up more in transfer talk this summer. He does. He's got a contract up in 2026, so he's gettable. I think signed for just €8 million 2 years ago. So I feel like around the £40 million mark, maybe you could get him. It would probably be a similar price to Bakayoko, but this is someone who's proven in the Premier League in a difficult season for Brighton last year. Adingra put up some really serious numbers and played a good amount of football as well. Obviously played a heroic role in the Ivory Coast's AFCON victory as well in the final. Off the left, may I add, as well. So if Liverpool are looking for someone who can do the business on the left, even though he's played the majority of his football for Brighton on the right, I think Adingra ticks a lot of boxes. And you speak about Bakayoko's dribbling ability, Adingra as well, especially as a ball carrier. Maybe not necessarily as someone who's always going to take a man on, but someone who can get the ball into the box. He's right up there with the very best. He was completing over 2 carries into the penalty area every single game last year. That's more than Salah was managing. That's more than Pedro Neto was managing. That's actually more than Saka was managing for Arsenal, more than Savio was managing for Girona. Of course, gone back to Man City this summer, or has gone there from Troyes. So, yeah, he was a player who almost all of Brighton's play was going through, especially in a year where Kaoru Mitoma, who'd been so explosive for them the season before, had a bit of a drop-off, had issues with injuries. He was actually receiving more progressive passes. So, in terms of like progressive passes, obviously those are passes that are, moving the ball more than 10 yards in the opposition half generally. He was receiving more of those, or he received more of those in total than Kylian Mbappe did for PSG last year. So in terms of someone who is already used to being relied upon a lot in a top league, I think Simon Adingra just ticks so many boxes for me. And in terms of his adaptability to play on the left, he is right-footed, so he can go both ways. Last year, up against Ezri Konsa on the left, he produced 4 shots, 5 key passes from the left in a 1-0 victory. So, this is someone who can take on really, really solid defenders and get the better of them from both sides. So, yeah, I think Adingra is a real star in the making.
Interesting.
Wow, that's
great. They have just lost Pascal Gross.
Lost Pascal Gross.
Billy Gilmore potentially leaving as well.
But they have signed Minter, and I think he plays in that position. Big role this season. Obviously, and Ciso also back from injury. Mitoma back from injury. I think there is going to be a bit of a dogfight for minutes at Brighton in those forward areas this season. This is a tough one, man. Cool. I think Mikey's pitch there was absolutely superb. I love Bakayoko, but the pitch was so good. I'm going to go.
The pitch has won it
for 2-2.
Wow! Yes, here we go.
Cool. Here we go.
Okay.
2-2. Yeah, I think Bakayoko would be an amazing signing, but I just like the suggestion of Adingra. It's a bit different, and it's a player that doesn't necessarily get as many props as some of the other players in that Brighton side either, does it? Pascal Gross, one of the most underrated players across the last few years, and Mitoma really. Everybody was on that hype train, weren't they?
Yeah.
Evan Ferguson, everybody on that hype train. Adingra, given that he was actually pretty excellent when he went away from Brighton as well and came back, I think.
Yeah. It is worth mentioning, guys, that we are going to talk about Man City in due course, but that is more of a discussion about their transfer business rather than a point-scoring business. So it's 2-2 at the moment. We are going to discuss Spurs, and this is for the win.
Tottenham, now this is a bit of a difficult one because there aren't loads of rumours about Tottenham transfer business, are there, at the moment? So one name that has kind of cropped up over the last few months, and it now appears they're going to miss out on, is Conor Gallagher, who has had a decision to make about his future at Chelsea. Still remains to be seen whether or not he'll say yes to Atletico Madrid at the time of recording. By the time you watch this, he might well have said yes or no, but it appears like he's not going to go to Tottenham. First and foremost, before we get into your suggestions, do you think Tottenham needed him? Because I look at their midfield and I think Maddison, Bentancur, Lo Celso still on the books. Kulusevski can play in that advanced role. Behind them, Basuma, Sarr, Skip, Archie Gray's been brought in. And they've got Lucas Bergvall, who in pre-season has been magnificent. It looks like they are going to rely on him as part of that senior squad this season. Where on earth does Gallagher fit? Or a suggestion/alternative to him?
Yeah, I think it's about outgoings, really. I think, obviously, Højbjerg's left to Marseille. I think they would accept offers for Skip if they are reasonable. I think Giovanni Lo Celso doesn't seem to have a massive future at Spurs either. So maybe, it would be Gallagher, Bergvall and Archie Gray replacing those 3 that I just mentioned as outgoings. But now, also, it felt like Gallagher and Jacob Ramsey seem like the players that are most linked to for that midfield role. Are they trying to up their homegrown quota as well? I'm not so sure. The player I've suggested is someone that I think could, give Basuma a little shake-up, really. At the back end of last year, I thought Basuma's performances did drop off quite significantly, but he is a more natural 8. It's Manuel Ugarte from Juventus. Now, Juve have had a huge summer of business. Douglas Luiz coming in. They're looking at Teun Koopmeiners now, Kefren Turam. They are trying to replace their entire midfield effectively, and Adrien Rabiot's already left. Locatelli's been playing for Juve for the last 3 seasons. He was a regular at Sassuolo before that. Last year, if I'm totally honest, wasn't his best. Wasn't his best at all. 1 goal and 4 assists, but his passing numbers were down. His just energy levels seemed a bit sapped as well. So I think he does need a change of scene. What I like about Locatelli in the Spurs midfield is I feel like they've got a lot of energy in that midfield, but it sometimes lacks in a little bit of guile aside from Maddison. I think there's a lot of workhorses in there, but Bentancur not the most creative, not the best at progressive passing, getting the ball in the final third. Neither Sarr. They're more sort of energy players. Locatelli, great eye for a pass, can score goals as well. I remember at Euro 2020 had an amazing game in their opening game. I think it was against Turkey. He's got 4 years left on his deal, but I think Juve would probably accept a pretty cut price fee for him, given the fact that they are trying to, countenance the sales or the incomings that they've made this year by selling, the likes of Sula, Illing Jr., young players that, supposedly had big futures there. Locatelli's slightly stagnated, and I wonder whether Spurs could take advantage of that.
How old is Locatelli now?
I do have it down here. I think he's 26.
Okay, so a bit younger than I thought he was going to be. But yeah, like you said, Juve are definitely turning over players. Even the sale of Dean Huijsen to Bournemouth. A bit of a surprise there. Barrenechea as well. Once upon a time, very high ceiling when he came out of Argentina. So I totally see your suggestion with a little bit more composure on the ball, a little bit more guile in the midfield. I don't mind that shout. And, they've done business, importantly, between Juventus and Tottenham in recent years. You think of Kulusevski, you think of Bentancur. Both of those were loans with obligations to buy if they reached a certain amount of appearances. That happened. Could you see another loan with an obligation to buy? We see that kind of deal happen a lot in Italy. So can you one-up Locatelli for the win?
Locatelli, yeah, I think is a very solid suggestion, and especially given Bentancur's injury troubles, I do think there's a need for someone who profiles a little bit more similarly to him. Not that they're exactly the same, but Locatelli, I think, could offer something similar. I've gone for someone a bit more versatile, potentially, but someone, who can fulfill a defensive role, also play a bit of a box-to-box role as well. Also looked in Italy. And I've gone to Atalanta and Ederson. Really, really solid season last year. I think also physically, I think will be up to an Ange Postecoglou system. I could see him either being able to fulfill a role in a double pivot, or if they were to persist with a midfield three, to maybe be a backup to someone like Pape Sarr. I think he just had a remarkable season last year. Dropped off a little bit in the second half of the season, but the first half he was absolutely class. Got 6 goals from midfield. He was putting up around 4 tackles and interceptions a game as well. And if we're looking at, if we were looking at someone who kind of profiles similarly to Gallagher, he does have that bite in his game, that ability to defend from the front, as we see Atalanta, do so well over the years. He's really, really cut out for a system like that. Really, really hard working, very quick actually as well, so fits in really well in that sense. Not the biggest ball progressor or biggest ball carrier, but I think he has the ability to do so if he's given more trust in with the ball at his feet.
Do you think he's gettable? Is the only thing I'd say.
We think Koopmeiners leaving as well, potentially for Juventus.
And Liverpool were linked with him early in the summer. Does he want to swap Champions League Atalanta for Spurs?
That does count against me a little bit, but I think in terms of the profile of player, I think.
Look at me just trying to get you down.
Dougie's smiling here because he's feeling the victory come along.
My only thought is do you pay any countenance to sort of Gasparini's fool's gold a little bit, in the how much does the system play a major role in the success of some of these players?
But you could say the same thing about Ange Postecoglou as well, right? Cristian Romero signed by Tottenham from Atalanta. On his day looked brilliant actually. I think he got a lot of stick, I think partly because of his disciplinary record when he was first at Spurs, but since Ange Postecoglou came in last year and instantly found the right partner for him, he's looked absolutely brilliant. I think there's something to be said. You're not signing a player from Atalanta and trying to put them into Jose Mourinho or Antonio Conte Spurs. We're putting them into Ange Postecoglou Spurs. He is. I'm yet to see a player underperform under him, and I know it's only been one season, but this manager has a track record of being able to get the very best out of system players. And I think Ederson has the. Has all the kind of physical and technical qualities to be able to make it in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think Ederson's press as well, his athleticism across the ground definitely leans me in that way. But I just think with Koopmeiners potentially going to Juventus, with Atalanta having Champions League football, I don't think he's budget. I can't see him going for a budget amount. Whereas Locatelli and the business Juventus have done this season leans me just in the favour of Dougie there.
Come on.
To win 3-2 and
Huge.
take the game.
Take the game. Let's briefly, before we move on to fan questions, touch on Man City. Joe, we've been giving you endless players to talk about this episode. Have you been surprised by City's lack of activity and the fact that it feels like Savio will be their only signing unless players leave?
Not particularly surprised, just because of how much of a settled squad Manchester City have and the volume of absolutely unbelievable players they've got at the club. I think they're definitely going to be hoping that some of the signings last summer improve again this summer. They're hoping, I'm sure, to get more out of a player like Mateus Nunes in those midfield areas, for example. And I also think they believe a lot of their young talents will take another step forward this season, particularly a player like Oscar Bob. You know, we talk about how amazing Cole Palmer was last season, and he was an absolute phenomenon. I remember when he left, there was news stories kind of suggesting that Manchester City felt Oscar Bob had a higher ceiling. So clearly they're going to rely on some of their young players. They're going to hope some of the previous season signings improve again. And unless there are major outgoings, i.e. something crazy happens and Kevin De Bruyne goes, which I don't think he will, I don't really see a massive need for incomings. It's a very settled squad. I think Savio was a really smart pickup. His numbers at Girona last season were sensational. He was already part of the CFG, so they've managed to get him on a cut price fee. The only area that might need some attention, I think, is potentially in the goalkeeping department, and that is if Ederson leaves the club. If Ederson stays, fine, but if he leaves, I think they probably will need to look to dip back into the market.
Yeah, it'll be interesting what happens with Ederson. It looks like they've now signed Predrag Rajkovic, the Serbian goalkeeper. Sorry, this is Al Ittihad,
right,
who were linked with Ederson. So it feels like the Ederson deal is now off the table. But that would have been a huge departure. I think that would have put a lot of pressure on Stefan Ortega, who did obviously had that great end to the year last year, but still pretty unproven for a club like Man City. Right, guys, before we wrap up the show, let's move on to our fan questions. We've got a great one here from Darnik33. It's a big one. We could do a whole show on this, but quickly, guys, what are your thoughts on the top four as it stands, as we film this on the 1st of August 2024? Mikey, you're going to have to just
This one's really taken me by surprise, this. I mean, the top two are obviously going to be out of Arsenal
but in
and
what
City.
order?
I am leaning towards Arsenal at the moment. Not necessarily because of this summer. I just think Arsenal have got better and better over the last 2 years. Over the last 3 or 4 years under Arteta. We're yet to see Arsenal not improve season on season under him, and they continue to do smart business. You know, if that Mourinho deal is over the line by now, that's an excellent piece of business. I think he is, great fee in particular. But I think he's exactly the kind of player that Arsenal need. He is a player for now. He's not a potential player. Like, they are getting a player in at the peak of his powers, who's played, in a really good midfield system for a number of years, joining a really good midfield system. I think Arsenal first, City second. Third and fourth, I think, is really tough. I'm still tempted to put Liverpool in the top four. I think they've still got enough quality, and I think Arne Slot's a good coach. I still think they've got very good depth there, although the lack of transfer spending so far this summer does concern me a little bit. Lack of a number 6, but I think they just about scraped fourth.
Scraped third, sorry.
I think they go fourth and then third. I don't know, maybe Spurs.
Okay.
Maybe Spurs.
You're going to have to stick with it.
Yeah, I'm going to say Spurs.
Joe.
I agree, Man City and Arsenal. I'm going to hold off on judgment as to who and in what order until the end of the transfer window. See if Arsenal manage to bring that lights up.
The first episode of the Lowdown.
As we stand today, I still think Manchester City win the league and Arsenal finish second. I think Tottenham potentially third as well. I just look at who's the most settled. In my mind, when I'm doing these predictions, I'm not really thinking about who's done the best transfer business or whatever. Who's the most settled? Arsenal and City are certainly the most settled. I think probably Tottenham, given that Chelsea, new manager through the door, loads of new signings. Liverpool, new manager through the door. Manchester United, very unsettled again. Tottenham under Postecoglou, improving, very settled style of play. I think they've got some really excellent players in that midfield and defensive unit, so I'm going to go them third. And I actually think Villa have got, again, the most settled managerial position with Unai Emery. He's an outstanding head coach. The squad was already excellent with a number 9 that is a proven goal scorer in Ollie Watkins. And with the signing of Amadou Onana, I think they've upgraded in midfield too. I think
over Douglas Luiz.
Yeah, I think that's an upgrade. So overall, I think I'll go with Tottenham and Villa, third and fourth at the moment.
Okay, fair
Liverpool,
enough.
United and Chelsea all missing out. That's mad.
That would be big. At the moment, I'm going Arsenal, City, Liverpool, and then Spurs in fourth. I was tempted by United up until a few days ago. I think those injuries, that's not ideal for the start of the season at all. Guys, get your fan questions in the comments for next week's show, and we will answer them as we come across them. Thank you so much for watching the first ever episode of the Lowdown. Huge thanks to Mikey McCubbin and Joe Thomlinson. Let us know your thoughts about the show in the comments, along with those fan questions too, and we'll catch you next week.